Welcome to week 3 of History of India. This PowerPoint lecture is about researching and writing critiques for this class. For critiques in this class, do not use vulgar language or cliches. Do not use general encyclopedias. Specialized encyclopedias, such as the World History Encyclopedia and the Encyclopedia of Asian History, are okay. And do not use websites. This is the exact rubric that we'll be using for grading your critiques. It is available not only here, but also in the syllabus. So let's discuss it point by point. First of all, I want you to notice that in an effort to help you analyze the readings and to write better critiques, each of these letters, C, R, I, T, I, Q, U, E, stands for something in critique. Let's start here. And first of all, let's say that this week 3, you have your first critique due, and that critique will be covering some assigned readings from your Concise History of Modern India, chapters 4, 5, 6, and 7, and from part 3 of The Elephant, the Tiger, and the Cell Phone. So let's distinguish those as the assigned readings. For every critique, you'll also be expected to find on your own at least one scholarly outside source. We're going to spend quite a bit of time during this lecture to discuss what that means and to show you how to find those scholarly sources if you don't know or already know how to do so, or to give you a review if you already know how to do so, or finally to clarify things if you're still uncertain what these critiques are all about. So an outside scholarly source, sometimes the best way to describe what it is first of all, again, to describe what it is not. It is not a general encyclopedia. We don't want you to use for your critiques things like Wikipedia, Encarta, Britannica, etc. Specialized encyclopedias like the World History Encyclopedia and the Encyclopedia of Asian History are fine. And we do not want you to use websites. That's not because I don't like websites. I actually love websites, the internet, and all things technological. Hence, I love teaching online classes as well as face-to-face classes. So I love the technology, but what I'm trying to do is to help you in the development of your career, whether you're in history or in another discipline, to help you find these scholarly sources and databases that are available. And of course, once we find a scholarly source, we want to read it, refer to it, show me in your critique that you have read it, and that to do so, I want to see a footnote. And of course a bibliography, and we'll talk about that a little later on in this PowerPoint presentation. So let's start over here. So you're reading your assigned readings for the week, and then you're going to find a scholarly outside source, at least one, and we want you to read those analytically. And when we say analytically, whenever we use that prefix an or ana in English words, it means literally to take apart, to tear apart. So when we read something, we are tearing it apart. We're taking it apart bit by bit and analyzing the different pieces, trying to see the overarching theme, trying to see how those pieces fit together, especially with other assigned readings and with other readings that we may find as scholarly sources on our own. That's analyzing, that's critical thinking. So that includes comparing, and comparing means to find similarities between two or more readings. Contrast, on the other hand, contrasting means to find differences between two or more of the readings. Now obviously, maybe one week you're doing a little more comparison, another week you may be doing a little more contrasting, maybe some of a little bit of both perhaps, but and then your whole paper's not about this because that's 7.5 points. Relating it to the time period for the readings of the week is always a smart idea. We don't want you to find an outside source, since we're now on leading up to independence and the independence of India in 1947. We won't want you to go running out and finding an outside source on the Gupta Empire, the Mauryan Empire, the Harappan civilization. We're finished with that. That's not the time period we're looking at. So your source and the things that you discuss in your critique, your themes and so forth, forth should relate to the time periods of the readings for the week. We've already discussed and we're going to discuss further how to find these scholarly sources. Then as you're reading your assigned readings and the one that you find, you should begin to tease them apart, and to do so with impartiality, objectivity. Now, some of you are historians, and so you know that as historians, we try to be as objective as possible. We try to seek the truth and to find the truth in all things, and to uncover those things that are just blatant untruths, that are lies, that simply are not factual. And that's true really of any discipline that we're studying, that we're majoring in here at Northern Kentucky University or any other university. We're trying to find the truth. Sometimes when we're in the hard sciences or disciplines like mathematics, very oftentimes that truth is more black and white than it is in some of the softer sciences or in some of the social sciences or the humanities like history. Where sometimes, the truth may depend on someone's perspective. It might not be as black and white, and indeed there could be many shades of gray, depending upon how you look at it and depending upon how a particular author looks at it and writes about it. And while all of that is true, these critiques are not an opinion paper. And so while you may have an opinion about the theme or themes that you're discussing, it's really not professional in this critique form to discuss those kinds of opinions. Okay, so you want to leave out words like I, my, and me, and all of those personal pronouns, and things like I think and I believe, because that takes away from the professionalism. And in college, of course, we're trying to learn this sense of objectivity, of professionalism, and to finding the truth. Now, as we read things, you're probably going to have questions. The more you hear from my lectures, or that you've heard already from Michael Wood's The Story of India, from your assigned readings, and from your outside scholarly sources, and as the weeks pass on, you're going to have all kinds of questions. Some of those questions are going to already have been kind of echoed before. For instance, one of them might be something I brought up in one of the first slides in lecture 1 is, you've got the United States and you've got India, and they both have similarities. They're both among the world's largest democracies. They both were colonies of Great Britain. English is generally spoken in one is the official language, as a second language in the other. So, what happened to India, which was once historically one of the world's wealthiest civilizations? How did it become so poor? So, there may be questions formulating in your mind, not only about India itself and where India fits into the world picture, but also where India fits into the readings for that week. So, begin to formulate questions. That's part of our analysis process. And that oftentimes leads us to the sixth thing there, uncovering what is left out. What has an author stated? And what has an author not stated? And did they not state it because it was not yet discovered? So maybe someone had not looked at a particular manuscript or done a particular oral history interview before, and maybe your author was writing in 1965 before another scholar published this great path-breaking work, path-finding work 10 or 20 years later. Is that why they didn't include it in their book from, say, 1965 or 1970? Or did they already know about that? Had that already been publicized in other scholars' work? But did they choose to ignore it because maybe it didn't support their theme or their thesis? And in fact, maybe it would have detracted from what they were trying to prove. So these are all the kinds of things that you should begin as you're a junior and a senior and in college to analyze when you're reading. And then to be professional, we always want to have edited work and not sloppy work. So the essay should be at least 750 words, submitted as a Word or Word compatible file. And I have an asterisk here that says essays that are too short or that lack themes, by their very nature, may also lose points in other categories, since they may not adequately address the topics and requirements in those categories. So say, for instance, if you only have a 500-word essay, you would not only lose, 10 points here, but if you only had a 500-word essay, which would really just be slightly longer than one-page double space, and 11-point type, then really you cannot achieve all of these other things like comparing and contrasting and teasing apart with impartiality and formulating questions and uncovering, because there's not enough meat there to do all that. So I would probably take off 5 points here and 5 points there. So all of this is interrelated. Now we're going to look more closely at 2, 3, and 4 here on this next slide of the edited section. Your critique essay, each one of them needs to have a theme or themes. Some professors call this a thesis, if we're talking the plural, theses. Same thing. Theme or thesis. Themes or theses. That evidence the fact that you've read the material, you've thought about it, you've analyzed it, you've torn it apart, you've considered all those things you need to consider as a professional, and you're giving a very good critique of it. So again, sometimes it helps to define what a theme is not before we define what it is. A theme is not merely a summary of the readings. So you and I can all read very well, and we may read 100, 200 pages a week sometimes, obviously more like 200 pages a week in this accelerated class. And we each may come to say, okay, here's a summary. But we don't want a summary. We don't want an outline. That doesn't really involve our thinking skills. What we want is something more than that, a critique. A theme also is not a category. So if you would say, well, in this paper, I'm going to discuss politics or the economy, art, architecture, religion, whatever. That is not a theme. That is a category. Each of those things is a category. So I think sometimes the best way to understand what a theme is to give an example, right? So let's assume that you were in an upper level United States history course, and you were asked to write on the period after World War II. One example of a theme for your critique might be something like this. After World War II, the American economy boomed as many people rose into the ranks of the middle class. Now, on the next slide, I'm going to develop this theme a bit and show you an example of a good introduction, that is, an introductory paragraph. If you were to continue with that, obviously, in your critique, you would have several more paragraphs which would support this theme. So you might have discovered in your readings, some statistics that would say, the census in 1950 showed this versus the census of 1940, which showed that. Or you might say so many million people entered the middle class in the 1950s and the 1960s. You might even say that, of course, this applied more to sometimes white people than it did to blacks, because civil rights was just getting a start and there were a lack of opportunities for many people of color in the United States. You might say that there were many women working during World War II and that many still continued to work after World War II, thereby supplementing a family income. You might talk about GIs, veterans returning with a GI Bill, and many of them going to college, and how they would graduate and sometimes be the first in their families to graduate, and how that made the economy grow. You might also talk, as there were more engineers and more scientists, that helped the economy. You might talk about new consumer goods and the latest innovations and inventions, and that everybody wanted a radio and then later a television and so on and so forth, and a washing machine and a car. you know, a garage to put the car in, etc. So you can see how the body of your paper would support your theme given in your introduction with evidence and with concrete examples, and sometimes that will include names, dates, and places as appropriate to your theme. And then a conclusion where you kind of in one full paragraph restate what you have just done in your critique essay and sort of tie it up in a nice little package with a bow. So let's start by looking at an example of a poor, unprofessional introduction which has no clear theme. We're going to look at this sentence by sentence and tell you why each sentence seems to be poorly written or somehow not clear enough, not enough clarity. First sentence. In this paper, I am going to talk about the economy. Obviously, this is unprofessional. This is kind of like a 6th grade sort of way to start a paper. In this paper, of course, we know it's a critique essay, so this is just unnecessary to say. I am going to talk about, well, we said let's professionalize it, not I, my, me. You don't need to say I at all. And you're going to talk, I don't think you're going to talk about it. You might be writing about it. So this is a poor sentence. And this is something you should scratch right off the bat. The assigned readings were really interesting this week. The assignment is not to determine your opinion of whether the readings were interesting or not. That is besides the point. One of your classmates may have found them immensely interesting, and you may have found them terribly boring. But they were given so that we could become familiar with a certain period of time and certain viewpoints in our study of the history of India. And so we want to make certain to avoid things like interesting or boring. So scratch that sentence. The economy was really good after World War II in the United States. Well, this is a very simplistic sentence. What do you mean by really good? Does it mean that it was much better than it had been during the Great Depression and World War II? Does it mean that it was really good for wartime production? Obviously not. Does it mean it was good for domestic production? Well, that's probably what the person means, but it's just not clear. People wanted to buy stuff. You wouldn't have to read 200 pages of materials a week to make a statement like that. What kinds of stuff? Again, it's not clear. And who are people? People adults, people children, people returning veterans, we don't know. They, who is they, couldn't buy things during the Great Depression, and the factories only made guns and bombs during the war. Okay, we understand what this writer is trying to say, but they're saying it in a very, again, simplistic way. Obviously, people could buy things during the Great Depression. They bought food and energy and all kinds of things. The factories only made guns and bombs during the war. Well, the factories weren't making automobiles during the war. They were making tanks, but you could buy automobiles. They just were used automobiles. And the factories were making peanut butter and jelly and bread and all kinds of cereals and lamps and clothing and everything else. So this again is only made guns and bombs. We know what the person meant, but it's just too simplistic. People couldn't attend colleges. Well, of course they could. Just certain people couldn't. And some people had no place to live. Well, women worked a lot in factories. Women have always worked a lot, maybe not a lot in factories. Did they work a lot in factories during the war, the Depression, after World War II? It's not clear here. There weren't enough apartments to rent and not enough money to buy homes. Very true, but again, are you talking about, after the war? Are you talking about why is this so, etc.? And then we have but America is a great country, and we proved it after World War II. I include this because, I want all of you to know that I've written a great deal about the United States, and I love the United States. And as a former director of international study, I have traveled all over the world, to communist countries, to countries who abuse their people, and I so appreciate our democracy. So I agree with this statement, but it's just not a statement that belongs in a professional critique essay, because it's more of an opinion. And we're writing this as if we would write it for anyone throughout the world to read it. And you're stating kind of here the obvious. And when we hear these very patriotic things, of course we're proud, but it's just, again, more opinion and maybe had nothing to do with what you read that week. Now, let's look, on the other hand, at an example of a good professional introduction with a clearly stated theme. After World War II, the American economy boomed as many people rose into the ranks of the middle class. Immediately we know what the theme of your critique is. It's stated clearly in this first sentence, and you're going to spend the rest of the critique discussing this. Okay? Excuse me. And notice that we haven't said, I am going to talk about how the American economy boomed, because you know it's I, because you have your name on it, and I know it's you because you sent it to me. So just go ahead and say it. After World War II, the American economy boomed as many people rose into the ranks of the middle class, period. For over a decade and a half, the Great Depression and then World War II had restricted consumer spending. In the post-war period, American consumers were eager to buy domestic goods ranging from automobiles to radios and washing machines. Their pent-up demands for the latest innovations spurred manufacturers to retool their facilities. Shifting from wartime production to domestic goods, factories churned out cars, appliances, toys, and clothing. Store shelves abounded with merchandise. Veterans enrolled in record numbers in colleges nationwide, and the construction and sale of housing units skyrocketed. We've given a clue here in our introductory paragraph. First, we've given a clearly stated thesis, and now we're giving a clue to how this happens and some of the topics that we're going to take up and some of the sub-themes, so to speak, or related themes that we're going to talk about in our critique. So if you're uncertain, look at this and see what poor, unprofessional looks like compared to good professional. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free always to email me or call me on my cell. Now let's talk a little bit about finding your own sources. In terms of finding a scholarly outside source for your critique, feel free to consult with me, a librarian, another professor, etc. The librarians at Steele Library here at Northern Kentucky University will set up an appointment with you, actually, and if you show them what your assignment is, they'll give you some clues as to how to find some of the sources. They're just excellent. The library here is just a fantastic facility. I'm always willing to help you, and I'm even willing to help you edit your work. So if you're not certain where you're headed, if you're headed in the right direction or not, and you want to send me a paragraph or so by email and say, can you look over this? Does this look good? Am I headed in the right direction? I'd be happy to read that and get back with you. Or if you even want to send, some students will send the entire thing to me before it's due, and they'll say, you know, not a couple hours before it's due, obviously, but, you know, couple days before it's due, and say, you know, can you read this over and can you let me know if this looks good? And if there's any grammar or spelling problems, can you change it? Can you proof it and change it for me? I'll be happy to do that, because the whole purpose of researching and writing is to teach us how to be better researchers and writers. So that's why I'm here, and I'm happy to help you proof things. And if you don't want to go to me, then go to the Writing Center at Northern Kentucky University or whatever your university you're enrolled at, or feel free to go to another professional, a professor or a librarian or someone you know who's a very good writer, and have them read it over and see if it makes sense to them. See if they can pick out the theme. See if they can say, hey, look, you've misspelled something. And don't also forget that Word and all of these word processing programs will find very oftentimes your spelling errors and your grammatical errors. So take advantage of that and clean that stuff up before you send it to me, and then you can get a better grade. Please do not share your scholarly outside source with another student in this class. Please do not ask another student in this class to share their scholarly outside source with you, because that just defeats the purpose of why we're doing this. We want you to be able to find scholarly outside sources. Blackboard, and by the way, just to, if that's not enough encouragement, then we'll show you the disincentive. Blackboard includes very sophisticated plagiarism software for professors these days, including recognition of the same sources being used by 2 or more students in a class. So if I suspect that 2 students have shared sources or themes, I reserve the right to give each of them a 0 for the critique. Blackboard is so sophisticated that if you would say, I don't think I really have time to read those readings, and I'm just going to kind of head to the web and find something and cut and paste it, Blackboard, pretty much 100% will find it on the web. It will mark exactly where it came from. It'll tell me that it was picked up and plagiarized. If you plagiarize from another student who's already gotten in their paper, it will pick that out and tell me, because it goes through all the other student papers that have been sent in. It will even find and look through your bibliography and your footnotes. So please do your own work. That's basically what that's all about. And if you don't know how to use footnotes, or you're confused about footnotes, footnotes appear at the bottom or foot of a page, hence their name. Endnotes appear at the end of a paper, hence their name. For this class, feel free to use in-text footnotes. This is an example of an in-text footnotes, where you literally going through, you have a footnote. Instead of putting a footnote number, you put a parentheses, the last name of the author, year of publication, comma, page number, and parentheses, period. Then in your bibliography, you'll have all of the other information, so I know, what the title of the article was or whatever. And so we're back. Sorry about that. Bibliography. So a bibliography is a list of sources used given at the end of your paper. It includes important information such as the author's first and last name, the title of the book, the place of publication, the publisher, and the date of publication. I'm showing you bibliography. In history, we use the Chicago style, and we indent the second line of a bibliography. In between citations, these are single space, but in between citations, they're double space. Usually after you start doing this, Word will figure it out and follow your line spacing. I'm showing that they're by the author's last name alphabetically. I've made up all of these things. None of these are real. So notice that Jane Doe comes before John Doe, because Jane, if you have the same last name like Smith or Doe or whatever, then you have to go to the author's first name, and J.A. comes before J.O. And if you notice here, now you've got 2 things by John Doe, so now you have to go to the third thing, and M comes before T. And then, of course, D comes before M, which comes before PL, which comes before PS. Please ignore the fact that this is a website. You're not going to use websites. I just generally show this in all my classes to show how a bibliography lines up alphabetically. Notice I have the important things: the author's last name, the author's first name, how to be a straight A student. This is the name of the book, the title of the book. Titles of books get italicized. Period. Cincinnati, comma, Ohio. This is the place of publication. This is the publisher, Smart Books, comma. This is the year of publication. Let's look at the next one, which says John Doe, my life as a plagiarist felon. This is the name of the article. Names of articles get quotation marks around them. The article is from a scholarly journal that I made up, the Journal of Criminal Studies. Because it's the title of a journal, titles of journals, like titles of books, get italicized. This is the volume number. This is the number. Spring, page numbers that appeared, and so on and so forth. And I give you wonderful examples of all of this and break this down. So you need all of these things in your bibliography. If you're looking at a book, you need the author's first, last name, the title, the publisher, the date. This is what a dissertation would look like if you're getting your information from a dissertation. This is a scholarly article, and many of you will be finding scholarly articles or magazine articles. That's how you cite it in your bibliography. This is a book review. Probably none of you will really be looking at book reviews, but you might. So this is how you would do that. Probably none of you are going to go and look at manuscripts, which are primary documents, but in case you would in a different class, etc., and the same probably with an interview. Now, we in history use the Chicago Manual of Style. If you're uncertain how to cite a source, try to print out this PowerPoint presentation so that you know in advance what we're talking about here, and you have examples of how to do the different bibliographic citations, or ask me if you're not certain. So, then we get to the big question. Where do I go for an additional source and what's trustworthy? Well, we're going to steer you away from what I call radioactive resources. We're going to steer you away from internet websites, including Wikipedia. We're going to steer you away from general encyclopedias. And instead, we're going to show you the wealthy world of digital resources of NKU's Steely Library. And being a student here, enrolled in a class, even if you're from another university, but you're enrolled in a class, obviously you have access to NKU Steely's Library's databases. Now, when you go to www.nku.edu, in the upper right-hand corner, if you click the drop-down list, you'll see Library Steely, as I've marked here with that big yellow arrow. And usually the Steely Library databases that we're going to be discussing will require you at some point to log in, so you'll have to use a username and your NKU password, as I show you here with a big yellow arrow. You can go over to the left here, and this is actually Research Help is up here. Somehow the little arrow got moved. Sorry about that. And then you'll find under that Research Guides. And you'll have all different kinds of possibilities. This is Alan Ellis, who's our professor of library services for history resources here. Now, we're going to be looking at India, so India is listed with world history rather than American history. So that's what we're going to be looking at, history world. Okay. Under Credo reference ebooks and so on and so forth, under reference items, you're going to find some really nice reference ebooks, and these are scholarly, so feel free to use them for your weekly critique essays. You might also find here some humanities ebooks. Electronic books, of course, you know, are becoming more and more popular as the years pass. And you might say, I don't have time to read a book, but obviously, we're not asking you to read an entire book as your outside scholarly source, because you don't have time to do that unless you're a really fast reader. Instead, you might want to just read a chapter, okay, in that book. And a chapter in a book is usually about the equivalent of a journal article, right, in a scholarly journal. So a lot of students actually do go and find a book and read a chapter or so out of it and do that for their scholarly outside source. Well, there's always a half dozen ways to find what you need. So if you went back to the Steely Library website and you click the drop-down menu for journals A through Z, you could go and find JSTOR, and you could type JSTOR in right here, or you could look for it under J. JSTOR is a database that contains many scholarly journals containing millions of articles. So you'll have no trouble finding something. They have all kinds of different searches for JSTOR. We're going to try a JSTOR search for the Habsburg Dynasty. The Habsburg Dynasty has absolutely nothing to do with India. This is just the general thing that I show my class. So I went through and I did all of the stuff that says here. I typed Habsburg Dynasty. I clicked only content that I can access. I changed the years from 1990 to 2013 because, I just wanted something more recent. That was just me. I clicked scholarly articles. I clicked history and I clicked search, and wow, I found 2,216 items. And maybe I decided I don't want book reviews, but articles, so I can, ignore the ones that say book reviews, like review here, and just concentrate on the ones that are articles. And then if I kind of click on something, this little thing over here on the side gives me a little abstract of what I'm looking at. And lo and behold, it's in PDF. So if I click that, it will download the article in PDF form, and I can read it on my computer, or I could read it and I could go ahead and print it off on my printer and read it, and my work is half done. And you'll notice that when you download the PDF, the first page of the download has your bibliographic citation. And I say, how cool is that? Because this is all the stuff you'll need for your bibliographic citation and your bibliography for your critique. It gives, as you see, the name of the article, the author, the source, the volume number, the year, the page numbers. So everything you need. So print that out. And under the databases, so if you went back to Steele eLibrary, the databases tab, there's a treasure trove of digital full-text articles accessible through JSTOR, which we just looked at, through Academic Search Premier and Project Muse. These are probably the three principal ways that we in history find scholarly journals with scholarly articles. Experiment with these yourselves in finding articles for your critique essays. For instance, if you went under JSTOR directly, okay, that's one way you might want to do it. Now you might say, well, I'm not interested this week in a scholarly article and maybe not an ebook, but I am interested in maybe just running by my local public or college university library and getting a book on the topic. Well, then you can make the task easier for you by going to databases and then W and then looking under WorldCat. And WorldCat stands for World Catalog, and it ties together thousands of libraries worldwide and literally millions of books. WorldCat is amazing. And if you find a book somewhere else in the U.S. or in the world, you can complete the electronic form for NKU's Source Finder. They'll try to get the book sent to you. It could take a few weeks. This is only an 8-week course, so I wouldn't suggest you go this route. But I do tell you, in case you have a 16-week course or a face-to-face course, and you're really like doing your senior paper, your senior seminar, that we have just an excellent source finder at NKU, and they'll get interlibrary books, and they just are fantastic. Anyhow, I'm going to show you in WorldCat, really easy. We're going to search for Encyclopedia Northern Kentucky. I'm going to select here on the drop-down list title, and then I'm just going to click search. 3 easy things. And I end up getting 119 libraries worldwide that have my book, the Encyclopedia of Northern Kentucky, which is like 1,100 pages. Whoa, that was a lot of work. Now it lists 119 libraries worldwide, and the next two are listing 2 libraries, so a total of 123 libraries catalog the book. And I don't know why it's appearing 2 different ways. They cataloged it, these 2 libraries and these 2 libraries, slightly different than these libraries did. Don't know why. Notice that NKU has the book, so you wouldn't have to have it sent through SourceFinder. But let's pretend that the copies at NKU were already in circulation, so you have to get SourceFinder to find another copy for you. And you just click the title, boom, and it takes you to SourceFinder, and you click SourceFinder, and if you've done SourceFinder before, it'll just take you to the forms. If it doesn't, then you'll need to set up an account, but it'll show you how to do that. The one thing we're required to do when we have papers in a class, face-to-face or online here at Northern Kentucky University, is to let you know what plagiarism is so that you can avoid it. Plagiarism is a big deal these days because, obviously, of the internet and websites. Plagiarism in some ways is becoming it's easier to do, to cut and paste in a digital world. But of course, as I pointed out, there are many downs to that as well, and one of them is that we also have the software to detect it. But anyhow, what you need to do is know that anytime you are quoting from anything, a book, journal article, whatever, verbatim, that is word for word, you need to put that quote in quotation marks and cite it in a footnote. This even applies to paraphrasing sometimes people's rather unique ideas, thesis, themes, things they've been spending years maybe researching. We're going to give you an example of that in a minute, so hold that thought. If you use somebody else's tables or graphs or photographs and they're not your own, you need to cite that. You never want to use another student's paper or presentation, even if that student approves, even if that student gives it to you. And you certainly don't want to buy an essay or get one free on a website. Again, Blackboard's going to pick up all of those kinds of website services. Now, an example of how you just avoid plagiarism. If you were reading this, for instance, and you wanted to just quote a few lines of this, and you were going to quote it word for word, that is verbatim, then you would need to put it in quotation marks, which tells me and tells all your other readers that you are quoting something word for word, that is verbatim, from a source. And if you were doing old-fashioned footnotes, it would look like this. Now, if you would decide to use instead this entire paragraph and quote it word for word, then you need to use a block quotation. So somewhere along the line, I don't know how long ago, some students said, I'm just going to pick out one quote after another and string them along, and that'll be my paper. And some professor said, you need to have a 20-page paper, and so they made a 20-page paper with just long quotes, one after another. And the professors all got together and said, gee, that isn't fair because they haven't written really hardly any of this paper. They've just cut and pasted it all. So when we use really long quotes, then what happens is we need to use a block quotation, which tells the whole world that we are quoting something really, really long, word for word. And then you actually have to indent it like this, and it has to be single-spaced, okay? Now, if you would take this same paragraph, I'm using the same paragraph as an example, and you're saying, well, I can take this and reword it, put it in my own words, not do it verbatim, not do it word for word, but reword it. Asia's population increased in the period 1750-1900 is evidenced by a population explosion in China from 143 million in 1741 to more than 400 million in the 1840s. You would still need, even though that's not word for word, even though you've put it in your own words, you would still need to footnote it, to cite it. Because number one, the first thing a reader would ask is, does this person have a photographic, that is, eidetic memory? And, like Sheldon does on The Big Bang Theory. And, by the way, eidetic or photographic memories are very much a controversy among scientists, psychologists, etc. Some people say they do not exist, and some people say yes, but they're very, very rare. Obviously, Sheldon is just a character in a fictional series. So let me tell you, for someone who's taught for 29 years, I have never, in 29 years, met anyone, student, faculty, staff, well-known author, professor, brilliant genius. I have never met, in my 29 years of teaching, anyone who has had an eidetic or photographic memory. So, that's our first thing. You wouldn't be able to do this unless you had an eidetic memory. Safe assumption, you don't. You might have a good memory, great memory, excellent memory, but not an eidetic memory. Number two, how do I know that the author didn't make this stuff up? Where did he get these statistics? So the second thing a footnote tells you is, I didn't make this up. Really, I didn't make this up. I got it from a source. And then the third thing is, as we develop and become more and more professional in our college career and in our chosen careers, we're going to start reading this stuff, and we're actually going to start looking at footnotes and reading footnotes to say, gee, I'm very interested in where that person got that fact, and I'd like to read more about that, and I'd like to maybe get this book and read more myself. So that's the other reason why you footnote it. Now, you don't need to get fanatical about this, so for those of you out there who are a little OCD, obsessive compulsive, you know who you are. You don't need to get, to blow a couple brain cells on this, but just to chill out. That generally known information does not need to be footnoted. These are all examples of generally known information. So it's only when you get things like, that are very statistical, or if we're really going to go into something that took an author years and years to research, etc. Let's say you decide to stick into your critique a graph or a map or whatever. You need to let us know where that comes from. Just like in my own presentations and lectures to you, I always let you know the source of all of those. Well, anyhow, that is the long and short of critiques. I hope that this was very helpful to you. I am always happy to answer any questions or to clarify anything that you might have on your mind. Please feel free to email or phone me. I'm always happy to help, and I hope you have a great week.